Hi, Ben.
Hi, Jill.
Thanks for agreeing to talk to me today
Pleasure.
about your practice of NVR and how you weave in your narrative therapy ideas around that. That's going to be the theme of our discussion tonight.
Right.
And I was just thinking, actually, to start with, Ben, could you just, for the benefit of people perhaps who are just starting out and are just inquiring about what narrative ideas are, can you just explain a little bit about some of the main points of narrative therapy?
Yep, sure. Um, so I hope I can do this justice, but I guess that one way I think about narrative therapy is that I think there's lots of points of connection with other modalities of therapy where in that narrative therapy is very interested in how people make meaning and how they attribute meaning to events in their lives. So there's the idea that no event in our life comes with a meaning attached, that we make the meaning in some way, and that affects how we respond to the event. And so narrative therapy is very interested in the stories that people tell about their experiences, and also about the stories that they have about problems and dilemmas that they experience in their lives. And one of the ethics in narrative practice is that narrative therapy seeks to create some distance between a person and the problem and thinks about the problem as the problem, as opposed to the person having the problem. So very keen to think about the relationship that a person has with a problem. And one common method in narrative therapy, amongst many other methods, is externalization, so objectifying problems. And part of the intentions for externalizing problems and exploring people's relationships with them is to help people to experience a sense of agency in their lives, a sense of that there's something they can do about the problem. So in that, narrative therapy is interested in thinking about how people are already acting in accordance with what they give value to, with what is precious to them, with their commitments in life, and the history of these, and thinking about how the stories they have about these commitments might be of use to them in tackling the problems that they're facing. And very much interested in linking people's lives and developing a sense of community and reducing the isolation that so often is inflicted upon families and individuals and who are facing really serious problems. So I could go on and on and on about this, but hopefully that's enough to just set the context. And I guess it's important to acknowledge that the originators of what has come to be known as narrative therapy, there's been lots of people who have innovated, but it was David Epstein and Michael White who really got these ideas going and drew on a multitude of influences from French philosophy, cultural anthropology, and sociology, feminism, social justice, and lots of influences outside of psychology. It's important to acknowledge.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben. I think that's a really useful summary. And maybe you could say then a little bit about your experience of working with those kinds of narrative ideas, which are very broad. I mean, you said yourself it's hard to kind of capture it in a kind of concise way, but you did really well there. But can you just tell me a little bit about how you apply those narrative ideas yourself in your practice of NVR? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. I guess I guess I discovered sort of quite early on in NVR that if I think about or trying to use NVR or thinking about it as a technique to use with families, then it would very often fail spectacularly, and I would had lots of mixed experiences of sometimes it's working very well and people being able to grasp the principles, some of the principles of NVR and practices and the methods, and other people who really struggled with this, and I became very interested and appreciative of the challenge that this gave me. So I guess that I sort of turned to narrative therapy to think about a lot of the work that needs to be done in order for people to be ready to take a step towards NVR, to feel ready to take a step to begin to feel a sense of agency and like they can have an influence when there might be just such entrenched and powerful experiences of hopelessness and and powerlessness in the face of quite overwhelming oppression. So I guess there are lots of ways, but one idea is that in narrative therapy, particularly working with people who have experienced trauma, is that people always respond. That people are never passive recipients of trauma. That is, that's been a very important idea. So I'm very interested in how people are responding to oppression, both that they may be experiencing through the violent and controlling actions or destructive behaviours of their children or others around them, but also in the history of their lives and how they might have been responding to these challenges in the past. That's one idea. And I guess that once we start to identify the responses that people have to oppression, we begin to learn about what, how their responses might be reflective of what they give value to, what's important to them, what has helped them to keep going, how it is that they've managed to respond in the ways they have. I also, I often use externalization to externalize various different things, whether it is guilt or shame, for example, that might be having a very constraining influence on parents and families, perhaps feeling responsible for their child violence or mental health struggles or other difficulties they might be facing. We objectify shame and think about what it's tried to convince parents of, where it gets its power from, the intention that shame has for parents' lives, and start to deconstruct it by placing the experience of shame back into social discourse and cultural beliefs. Like mother blame is a classic one that I'm very interested in, because so often mothers get blamed, in particular mothers get blamed out of parents, fathers as well, but for difficulties with children, and this is not often spoken about, and I think Western psychology has a lot to answer for perpetrating and maintaining these ideas. And so I think these are sort of very important discourses, I think, that I try to bring into the room when talking about people's experience.
Can I just ask you, when you were saying earlier that that the idea that initially you were using NVR as more of a set of techniques and how spectacularly that failed at times for you, have you found therefore that when you take a more kind of wider narrative approach, this slows down the therapy because you're talking more about, I guess, beliefs, values, people's relationship to ideas about motherhood, fatherhood, parenting. Is that right? Would it slow down the therapy? Does it take the therapist into a different position with a family, do you think?
Yeah, I think it does slow things down. I think I think NVR it's all about how we do NVR. And I think there's it's important that we don't just invite those who are consulting us into a stance of nonviolence, that we also have to, as therapists, adapt or adopt a position of nonviolence, to not do violence in therapy by colonising people's beliefs and their experiences and their history and obligations within their culture to be doing their parenting in certain ways. I think there's a danger that we could sort of trample on some things that are quite precious to them and amplify feelings of failure by coming in to say, well, actually, here are some ways that can be done. This needs to be done differently. And I'm not saying for a second that most practitioners do this, but I think there's a danger that sometimes we do this, and I am guilty of that. That I've had those experiences, and fortunately, families have very generously told me that in different ways that this is not working. This and the ideas are not landing because we haven't created a safe enough context for them for the ideas to be useful.
And I think as well, what you're making me think of is how when we become passionate about an approach, we can be blind then to the impact of our own passion on the other person. And I recognise myself in that, in terms of what you were just saying, that we feel it's the way and the right way, and perhaps not always being considerate enough then of as you say, the family's own where they are.
And it's and NVR is about building relationships, isn't it? It's not about changing behaviour. So if we start to ask people or encourage them to change their behaviour, parents to change their behaviour, before we have a relationship with them, there's something there's nothing isomorphic about that. There's not we're not practicing what we preach.
No, absolutely.
In a way. So I think and narrative ideas for me. Because different people have different experiences with them, but I find very useful in holding that idea close about the privileging the relationship and the expertise that people have on their own lives, privileging their knowledge, helping them to discover aspects of their experience that are resonant with NVR principles. And other principles that might be helpful to NVR and help them to make NVR their own, as opposed to their culture being taken over by a culture of NVR.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess what I'm hearing you saying is that you're making a distinction, it seems to me, around NVR as the set of techniques, which it is, it could be, and NVR actually as a set of principles which inform your practice. And could you just talk a little bit more about, I know you have done, but can you just maybe talk a bit more about that distinction, how that would work?
Yeah, I often, when I'm introducing NVR to families or in groups or in whatever context working, because I work in a child and adolescent mental health service in London, public service. And in independent practice. But in any context where I'm introducing NVR, I encourage parents to hold these ideas lightly. That this isn't a set of techniques, but this is a set of, there are some methods in here and there, but there are some principles that to be thought about. This is a way of living. This isn't a parenting program. There's not a quick fix. So that's one idea. I encourage people to not run with the ideas too quickly. Yes. To really take time and encourage them to make as many mistakes as possible. Because there's a real danger that when someone comes in, an identified expert, or someone who should have the knowledge and the tools to help, help someone tackle the problems that they're facing, that they invest a lot on this being the solution, and then there's a danger that I might be attributed the credit if things go well, too much credit at least. But also it sets people up for an experience of failure, I think, potentially, when things don't work out without enough sort of groundwork. So, I think NVR is all about how we do it and taking small steps. And it's those the small steps of resistance to controlling interactions can be very fertile openings for other stories of resistance in people's lives. I ask people sometimes, looking at story, similar to what, I guess, on the back of what I was saying before about if they're describing a situation where someone has been trying to control them, I might ask about, could you tell me a story about how you've responded in other situations when you've had an experience of someone trying to control you, or a time that you didn't allow someone to completely control you. Has there ever been a time that you've sort of that you haven't gone along with everything that someone has wanted you to do? These sorts of questions sometimes can take us to very rich and alternative territories of people's lives. When the dominant story about someone when they're referred to me might be that this story may be nowhere near visible. So I'm interested in I guess not uncovering, but sort of raising the profile or the presence of the preferred stories that people have in their lives. Yeah.
Okay. And it sort of sits alongside that idea of where there's power, there's resistance, and you're looking for that. I guess I'm hearing you. You're looking for the glimmers of where that might be.
Yeah.
Within our culture, there is a tendency, I feel, in the work that I do, to kind of catastrophize setbacks, and especially in professional domains, that if things are not immediately successful, then it's a disaster, and everybody's made to feel bad, and you feel a failure as a therapist. The family feels a failure. There's very different ideas that you've been talking about within the narrative frame, isn't it? That there tends to be far more of a solution focused, and you're looking for those edges with families where there's been an exception, things have been different. How do you use that when you're talking about setbacks with families? Just say a little bit more. I know you've touched on that a bit.
I guess, sometimes, I guess, even before the setbacks happen, we, plan for setbacks, that, often have a plan for and anticipate that they're going to happen. So I think that's part of, and planning responses. I think, this is, of course, a very important idea in NVR is the planning and anticipation, and, we might do that through role play and other things. But in talking about setbacks, I guess I might be, I often get curious about why things weren't worse. If people, what people were pleased about and the way that they responded to the setback. So I might be focusing more on their responses to the setback or the dilemma. And even if they weren't proud of their of how they responded in the moment, then and they might feel very guilty or ashamed or themselves, or really angry with themselves for doing what they did. They might have really departed from their commitment to non-violence. This is a really important experience. So this experience of shame or guilt, because there's, thinking of an idea in narrative therapy of the absent but implicit. The idea that any experience, any emotion and any negative, or not negative, but any experience or emotional experience that might cause despair or might be very difficult for us, will speak to something that's important to us, will be testimony to the fact that we're remaining connected to something that we give value to. So, I might ask people after we've talked about the experience of shame, for example, about if you could imagine that in some way this sense of shame was speaking to or was testimony to something you give that something that is important to you in life, that that you wouldn't have this experience of shame unless there was something that was important to you that you were committed to, that something that had been a hope of yours that had been frustrated, or what would you say that was? Or or in turning towards shame, what is it that's important or precious to you that you might be turning your back on? Kind of in looking at the other side of the coin, look at the alternative story behind this, and how is it that you've managed to hold on to the importance of your relationship and your hopes for your relationship with your son when you're under siege 24/7? How is it that you're able to keep that alive? And who else knows about your ability to hold on to this? We might. So that, I guess that's another way that I might use some narrative ideas, setbacks.
So it sounds like an opportunity for exploration around many different areas of a person's life, really, and helping them to think differently about a situation which might leave them feeling very disillusioned and disheartened and stuck. Yeah. And you're using that to gain momentum. There seems to be something around helping people to think differently. I wonder how you hold on to your own optimism personally as a therapist, because as you said earlier, this work is hard. It's hard for families. It's hard for therapists to do too. Yeah. How do you keep going and deal with situations where there might be partial successes or lots of setbacks, lots of things not going well? How do you keep going? What sustains you?
I think there's lots of things, I guess. The first thing that came to my mind is the the conversations that I have with families, and finding conversations that are because they sustain me as much as and that the conversations are sustaining for me as much as hopefully they are for them, if we can find the right way of the right conversation, the right way of talking about things. So I think that's one thing. I think when we're talking about the not necessarily trying to put a shine on situations or shying away from the hard stuff and what people are really struggling with, but sometimes there's just small moments in conversations when people will be holding on to whatever is precious to them, or be able to remember a similar time that they had gone through, or be able to think back what things were like a year ago compared to the situation that's causing despair at the moment, and to sort of reflect on how far they might have come, or even at the beginning, if they're at the beginning of making changes, about the small steps that they've taken so far, so that we don't allow setbacks and the hard times to separate us from the reality and the knowledge that might have been some progress made, however small. And I guess that there's something also about the idea that we cannot do this alone. I can't do it alone. I need to have my own community, so there's something important about having colleagues like you to be able to talk with, and this is very important to me and sustaining me in the work. And I think also, wherever possible, widening what helps to sustain me is feeling like I'm part of a community with the family. And and because there's a responsibility that comes with that, but there's also some support to feel like it's not just on my shoulders, so that we're in this together. So I guess there's something really important about thinking about what approach we use, and about what we're doing that is honouring the ethics that we bring to therapy and our intentions, and how we're building relationships and creating opportunities for collaboration. I think these things are at the heart of therapy, and that they should be at the heart of NVR practice. And I think because we're wanting to develop relationships, aren't we? So